Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rick Walker. Welcome back to the Maverick News Channel. Hello, Maverick family. And I see a couple of people saying, is he late or am I early? And things like that. Yeah, we're just a few minutes later than usual tonight. Well, a little bit late. That is because we have all this breaking news. We have the helicopter crash in Iran. The Iranian Prime Minister, President, missing, still searching. Kevin Michalizzi will join us in a moment to help us get proper perspective on that story. Tonight, also, a special guest returns. Pelle Neroth Taylor, author, TNT radio host. He's been on the program before. He's returning tonight. He went to Eurovision, and he will give us a recap and context, helping us understand what all those protests were about over there. We'll also dig into some of the top political stories of the day with him a little later on in the broadcast. So stay with me. We'll be right back, and Kevin will join us on the other side of this.
Maverick News. Fighting for freedom. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, defending free speech, Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, let's bring him in. He's in the backstage just waiting, and yeah, there he is. Welcome back, Kevin.
Hey, Rick. Good to see you again. Hello, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. As always, it is a very early morning over there for you. What is it, about 2 a.m.?
It is 2 a.m., yeah.
Over in Crimea, and
news never stops.
That's right, and lots of it today. Big news. Just give me your first thoughts on this helicopter crash involving the president of Iran.
Well, my initial thoughts, Iran has a system of dual power where they have a president and a spiritual leader, and their whole power is built in such a way that there are no irreplaceable people in the system. So all their personnel in the state system are trained extremely well. So we've got examples of like the death of General Soleimani back in 2020 from a drone strike by the U.S. Didn't lead to the collapse of the state security system or weaken the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. So the same can be said of the president, the supreme leader. They've got a vast talent pool. So if it turns out that the helicopter crash was sabotage, for example, or a terror attack, Iran's proven that it can recover quickly. But, the consequences could have a real set of dire consequences for the region. And, we have to consider, was it an accident? Was it an assassination attempt? I've seen a lot going on about, Israel assassinated him. You know how these high people are sometimes, demanding that their pilots will take them somewhere no matter what the weather is. It looks to me like wherever they were going, and they had a lot of high-level officials on one helicopter. There were two helicopters flying, but, one of them's gone down. And, looks like it was just bad weather.
Yeah, it is very foggy there. It is raining. I think it's turned to snow now because we're into the evening hours.
It gets very cold at night.
Yeah, and visibility has hampered the search and rescue efforts. So that tells me that the conditions for flying were not ideal to begin with.
Yeah. In fact, I uploaded a video that was just released by I don't know if it was Iran or Turkey that released it, but it's video footage from a Turkish drone, so people can see, how bad it was at the time. Let me throw that up on the screen. So this is kind of what we're looking at right now.
That's like soup.
That's like soup. It's supposedly very cold, windy, and I don't know. This is from a little earlier, apparently, but they just can't see anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
It's potential. I guess. I mean, the thing that top of mind, right? Everybody's going straight to it. Was this an assassination attempt? If this does turn out to be that, this is very dangerous. This is very destabilizing. So how do you think this will play out?
Well, if it was an assassination attempt or an assassination, they're going to blame Israel first. Israel has the greatest stakes in the game. We had the attack on the Iranian diplomatic mission back on, what was it, 1st of April, 4th of April, something like that. Mm-hmm. And 1st of April. And, it would be a good way to destabilize the region and pull the U.S. into a war that the U.S. doesn't want to get into. And, that would likely happen if it turns out that it was an assassination attempt.
And we just went through that attempt to assassinate the Slovakian prime minister, who I would say was kind of pro-Russian in his policies. There's unconfirmed reports of an assassination attempt on the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the president of Serbia as well.
in the last couple of days.
So all these things are kind of lining up, and it looks like if you start to connect those dots, it looks like we have maybe an assassination campaign underway, if you want to be conspiratorial or maybe realistic, depending on your perspective.
Yeah, it depends on how much you want to blame the CIA for stuff, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I'm seeing in the media here that might provide a degree of clarity or maybe just fuel the conspiracies more. I'm seeing mainstream media referring to the president of Iran as a hardliner. So this is the rhetoric that we're hearing. They're already pivoting over and latching onto the story again about Masha Amini, the woman that was in police custody and died. They're linking that to the laws that they have about wearing hijabs in public. That, of course, sparked all kinds of protests, not just in Iran, but really around the world, and certainly here in the West. When I was watching that, though, and I said this on the program, those protests, that looked to me like a CIA Western government fueled campaign to get people out into the streets. That had all the hallmarks of that.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that. I mean, you know, I can't confirm that. It's my opinion, but you know, the CIA and you know, Western military intelligence are real big on causing protests and coups and things like that. So it'd be right up their alley.
Yeah, well, it certainly had all the characteristics of that, and to the point even where we saw the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, here in Canada, within a few days, out on the street at Parliament Hill, you know, with a microphone. It looked very kind of local and organic, but he was out there giving a speech. But it just didn't feel, to me, it didn't feel natural. It was like they were trying too hard. It was clearly part of a choreographed campaign, and he was playing his part, doing his bit. That's the way I sort of saw it. So now when I see them bringing this story up again, putting this into the news articles related to this helicopter crash, this is telling me that they're trying to spin their side of it, or their version of events over here. The spin on both sides is just getting warmed up.
Yeah. So I don't know, you know, you're seeing over there that people are in the streets of Tehran celebrating and, you know, hoping for, you know, the news to come back that he's dead. But, you know, let's keep in mind, even though he may be a hardliner, there's people who like him and there's people who don't like him. But what do they get if the outcome is negative? Vice President Mohammed Makbar becomes the acting president until they hold early elections in Iran. So they, you know, you're replacing one ugly girl you're dancing with another ugly girl. So
yeah, as I look at it, I don't see a real benefit to Israel to do this right now. They have so much
enough problems,
trouble already. Like, to do this now, you'd have to be really stupid. But
well, stranger things have happened.
I know. I shouldn't be laughing because it's also tragic. But here's some video of what the search and rescue teams are being forced to deal with tonight. And we talked about the weather. Well, this gives you a good idea of what it's like out there too.
همکاران ما این گزارش رو تهیه کردن میفرستن. البته کار
And I'm sorry, I have no idea what they're saying. I don't speak the language.
الان تصاویر رو مخاطبین محترم میتونن ببینن که چگونه گروه‌های امداد در حالی که شب هست، بارندگی شدید وجود داره، هوا به شدت سرده، دارن با پای پیاده میرن تا منطقه رو جستجو کنن و به جایی که اون
The crew that is
در
shooting
واقع
this,
بالگرد حامل رئیس مخابرات در شهر
I wonder
لحظه‌ای
how they're getting the video back. They must have an uplink or something.
البته
Weird.
بسیار سخت
Yeah, you can only imagine they have some kind of an uplink there.
Because this
You know,
is it's supposed to be a mountainous area, remote location. I don't know.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there were also reports from the military leadership that somebody from the crash site had made a mobile telephone call as well. And,
Yeah.
you know, they haven't reported, you know, who it was or, you know, what they had to say. So, you know, did it happen or not? I mean, you know, I don't know.
And here's some
I
other
know
video.
my cell phone rarely works here, you know, where I am, and we're in the mountains.
I know. I'm right in the middle of a city, and mine doesn't work sometimes. Here's some, but this is Canada. What do you expect? We pay the highest cell phone bills in the world, and for data, and our service sucks. But thank you, Justin Trudeau. Here's some footage. The captions on this are that not everybody is. Or some people are celebrating or whatever it is, but make what you will. This fireworks, I guess.
جشن گرفتن مردم به مناسبت سقوط رئیسی دارن فشفشه میزنن. به به. انشالله به واقعیت تبدیل شه.
I don't know.
جشن گرفتن
Propaganda. I don't know.
Well, you know, very well could be. Like, you know, like we already said, there were people there, or are people there, that don't like them, and some that do. You know, this is what I have from the streets of Tehran, and these people don't look too happy about it. So, you know, people praying and showing concern. You know, I'll do everyone the treat to show that I can put up videos where I don't have any idea what they're saying either. So,
давайте пройдемся и посмотрим все своими глазами.
so this one guy keeps showing up in all these videos. So, you know, again, propaganda. That was a report from RT, but
it's hard to know what the truth is. But as we were saying before we came on the air, I said probably to some degree or another, both things are true. You have people who are happy and people who are, you know, upset.
And both sides are spinning it to their advantage. You know, you get a video of a couple of fireworks and, you know, everybody is celebrating. You get, you know, various news media, RT, Iranian news in Tehran, taking pictures of the same, you know, half a dozen people praying and mourning and hoping. And, you know, now you have everybody is praying for him.
So I mean, yeah, your background is largely in information warfare, intelligence, right? So when I'm seeing stories here in the West about aging equipment, aging helicopters, helicopters that they have difficulty getting parts for because they're so old that they date back to even the 1970s. What should I make of that? Do you put any stock in that?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, the helicopter that went down was an Italian-made version of the U.S. Huey helicopter. So is it old? Isn't it? Well, let's look at all the F-16s that the United States is, you know, touting as the savior of, you know, like Ukraine. Those things are equally old, if not older. So,
yeah. Hardly
you know,
a fifth generation fighter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could be relatively new, it could be relatively old as far as getting parts for things like this. Um, you know, that's certainly propaganda. Iran has, recovered well from sanctions. They make their own parts. In fact, when Russia was said to not be able to keep their planes in the sky because of a of parts for airliners because the West wouldn't sell them spare parts, they were getting them from Iran and China. So, and we know everything Americans made in China. So,
That's right. That's very true.
yeah.
So
Um,
I didn't watch any reports, but I didn't have time. But I did see the headline over at Infowars. They of course went straight to this appears to be an assassination attempt, and I'm seeing other, I'll call them pro-Russian influencers online, taking the same approach to the story.
Yeah, I agree, and yet, you've got, the United States and France, I think it was, one of the European countries, offering satellite imagery of the area, trying to locate the plane, and the Iranian media has actually said that they're, looking at satellite images, so. Again, we come back to, is there any benefit for somebody who's trying to get rid of him to actually be helping them, find the guys? We've got a lot of countries out there showing a lot of support for finding the guy. Putin gave orders, it was about a half hour before we went on the air. They've landed 2 planes with 50 mountain rescue personnel to the area to do searches. They've got Turkish UAVs. They've got, a Turkish AS-532 helicopter searching the area, Ukrainian drones. And, they can't get parts for helicopters and things. They can build the most advanced drones in the world, but they can't keep helicopters and planes in the air? Don't know.
We wouldn't normally, I don't think, I know we wouldn't focus this much attention on a story like this if this had happened at a different time, but this is of heightened concern because of this conflict in the Middle East, this Gaza situation. Do you think there's any incentive for Iran? And I don't mean to offend anybody, but if he is dead, if these guys are dead, does Iran have an incentive to, regardless of the facts, just point a finger at Israel and lay blame there?
Nah, historically, that doesn't seem to be Iran's, method of operation. They're, pretty slow to react, and I don't think that they want to generate a conflict that would undoubtedly pull the United States into it. Realistically, Israel can't survive against attacks from Iran. So we know the United States would step in and, either attack back or at least push extremely hard. So I think it would be a disadvantage for them to do that.
Actually, I'm wondering if I would have agreed with you on that point about 6 hours ago.
I went to bed then, so.
Until I saw this today. Joe Biden went to, what was it? It was he's at a university, and he's, anyway, he's there. I'm not sure what the event was. Okay, so he's there. It starts off with this guy, this student speaking. I'll start with this, and then are you aware of this story yet?
No.
Okay. It's going to start with this short clip. Then I'm going to show you what Joe Biden said. And this is why
Okay.
I'm beginning to wonder if what you just said will hold true.
It is my stance as a Morehouse man, nay, as a human being, to call for an immediate and a permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip.
So this is this is the valedictorian calling for a ceasefire, and then Biden's applauding.
It is
see?
my stance.
So media's making a big deal out of
Looks
his
like
applauding.
he's asleep.
Yeah, that's true. But then Biden speaks and says this. So I don't know. I don't know. He's going to call here. He's going to back this guy up and call for a ceasefire.
What's happening in Gaza and Israel is heartbreaking. Hamas's vicious attack on Israel, killing innocent lives and holding people hostage. I was there 9 days after. Sent pictures of tying a mother and a daughter with a rope, pouring kerosene on them, burning them, and watching as they died. Innocent Palestinians caught in the middle of all this. Men, women, and children killed or displaced in desperate need of water, food, and medicine. It's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That's why I've called for an immediate ceasefire. An immediate ceasefire to stop the fighting. Bring the hostages home.
An immediate
And I've been
ceasefire.
working on a deal as we speak. Working around the clock to lead an international effort to get more aid into Gaza, rebuild Gaza. I'm also working around the clock for more than just one ceasefire. I'm working to bring the region together. I'm working to build a lasting, durable peace. Because the question is, and you see what's going on in Israel today, what after? What after Hamas?
Good luck with that, Joe. Just-
You know, I just have to go back to let's blame Hamas and it's a crisis and we're working for a permanent ceasefire. But even though we delayed sending them bombs for a whole 24 hours and then we started shipping them more again to Israel. So, I don't know who's running his teleprompters, but he obviously has, no credibility in what he says at all.
He's pandering to those voters in Michigan.
Yeah.
Dearborn. Yeah. That's what he's doing right there. The question is, how far will he go? Is that just talk, or does this show that his ironclad support for Israel isn't as ironclad as he says? I've never heard him say what he said there in that, using that kind of language, calling for an immediate ceasefire. That's what what do you think? Are these protests that we're seeing beginning to have an impact? Is clearly public opinion is stacked up against Israel. So in this election year, do you think Biden is responding in kind?
I think it is all about the vote. Like I say, he's out there on the campaign trail talking about, what he's doing for the Palestinians. We're putting a pier in place and delivering food. Never mind the fact that the trucks can't get to it because of all the rubble. They're shipping, like I say, massive amounts of weapons and ammunition to Israel to continue the fight. But Biden also, more than likely, or his campaign at least, knows that, one of the largest voting blocks out there at this time is the younger generation, the 20 to 30s to 40s, the people who are, very much pro-Palestinian. And I think as this war continues, he's losing more and more voters. Now, I haven't heard Trump say anything reasonable lately either. I haven't heard him say much of anything about the Israel situation for a couple of weeks.
Actually, in his last speech last speech or the speech before, he came right out and said that Israel needs to go into Rafah and finish the job and do it quickly. He said that might not be popular and that might cost me votes, but you have to do the right thing. That's what he said in his speech. I remember it distinctly. I don't have the clip here to share with you, but he definitely said that. That's different than what we just heard Joe Biden say, and it's somewhat different than what we've heard coming from RFK Jr. too. So as time goes on, these guys are beginning to sort of define their position on it more clearly.
Well, maybe they're both, shooting to put RFK Jr. into office. So,
Yeah, it could be.
Maybe it's the opportunity for a third-party candidate.
Any candidate that touches this issue, I think it's a losing proposition. Sort of no matter what you do. This is a hot potato politically. It's not good to talk about it.
Yeah.
And in the early stages, RFK Jr. suffered immensely because of it. None of the other candidates did, but his own people from his own campaign were hammering on him, just really being critical because he came out in support of Israel. But all the candidates at that point had been supportive of Israel. But boy, he seemed to pay a really heavy price. But I think that's because the people around him tend to be very progressive politically, and that group is very pro-Palestinian.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, Syria's agreeing with you.
Okay. Well, I'm glad somebody's agreeing with me. There's one.
Yep.
Oh, man.
So I just want to address one thing and give Lori out in the audience a little bit of support. Lori, I agree with you. Any good pilot would know that those were not the conditions to be flying in, especially in the mountains, because the air is thin, and thin air is not good for helicopters. But as I said at the beginning of the show, you get some of these leaders that make demands of their pilots to fly when the pilots know that they shouldn't. They do it, or they lose their jobs, or worse. So,
yeah. What other video do I have for you here? Speaking of assassinations and attempts. So apparently, and I think this is true, 3 Americans have been accused of being involved in another failed coup attempt in Congo. This apparently left several people dead. And according to the Democratic Republic of Congo military, they stopped this attempted coup near the presidential palace. Now, I guess they have, as I say, arrested 3 Americans, and then we have some video of this. This involves a 36-year-old U.S. citizen who was born in Maryland. U.S. Ambassador to Congo, Lucy Tamlin, has acknowledged the involvement of U.S. citizens in a statement, and the coup was allegedly led by U.S.-based Congolese politician Christian Malanga. He was killed at the presidential palace after he apparently resisted arrest. So that's the information that I have, and I do have this video. Were you aware of this, or is this all new to you?
No, this is new to me.
Okay, so I'll show you the video that's out there. Here we go. Now, also, maybe it's related, maybe it isn't, but at Morehouse, with the video that I just showed you from there, apparently when Biden was speaking, there was no heckling, apparently, no protesting that took place while Biden spoke. But on stage, as I understand it, one of the university staff unfurled a Congolese flag on the stage, just silently, and just opened it up to make some sort of political statement. And now we're seeing this. So I have to think that those two things must be linked in some way. And if we're seeing that, maybe all these other things are related to the attempted assassination attempt on the Prime Minister of Slovakia, the other assassination attempts, maybe this chopper going down. Maybe we have something very dangerous on our hands here that we're observing. Or maybe I'm just being a conspiracy theorist. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I can't put it up for you because I didn't save it in my file, but, Russia is displaying photos of dead Americans in Ukraine, showing their passports and their U.S. military uniforms and patches. So, and that was just today. So we're involved, the U.S. is, all over the place. Now, we were talking earlier, does, Israel have anything to gain by, this crash? And this just popped across my desk. So this just came across. Celebrating. So who knows? You and I are in the same spot on this. Based on my experience, I wouldn't make a call either way. My gut tells me this was a case of a pilot, a military pilot, being forced to fly in weather that he didn't want to. And like I say, thin air, cold mountainous air, and the helicopter went down. I think that's all there is to it. But I think it's going to be made into something bigger.
That's what I'm afraid of. And man, if things weren't bad enough, now we have this. Feels like feels like just echoes of the the beginning of World War I. For me,
that's an assassination here, a shooting there, and all of a sudden everyone's fighting.
Yeah. So you have a few people dead, so let's kill a lot more.
Yeah. Now you're feeding the conspiracy theorists of wiping half of the population off the earth. So could be.
It's just
they're doing a good job of it.
My gosh. Okay, so who is this president? Ebrahim Raisa. I'm so Canadian. I know I have an accent. I don't think I have an accent, but of course I do. It's just everybody else knows I do.
Don't know what you're talking about, eh?
So I know that I don't pronounce some of these names correctly, Arabic names. Ebrahim Raisa. So
Raisa,
described here in the West as a hardliner. I guess he was a potential successor to become supreme ruler of Iran eventually, but a strong ally, supporter of the current supreme ruler. I don't know what else I can tell you about him because I don't know a whole lot myself. Maybe we can bring up some information to share with people on this.
Yeah, I have to look at it too because, quite honestly, other than the supreme leader, I don't know much about the guy either. I just did a quick search here, and the first thing that comes up is a dozen Western media saying that he's ultra conservative, with a history of atrocious accusation, widely considered, hardliner. Let's see what a source from the other side of the world says here.
Yeah, I understand. They have at least something like 40 different crews out searching, trying to get to wherever the location is. But I guess they've located it. They just haven't been able to get to it yet. Am I correct in that?
I've heard conflicting reports on that. The last thing I saw was that they know the general area, but they don't know, it hasn't actually been located yet. I think I sent you one of the earlier reports that said that they had located it, and shortly after that, the Iranian media and military said that that was not true. So they're still searching for it, as far as I know. Like I say, Russia's got 50 teams on the ground, so that's a lot of guys.
And just to pivot back for just a second to the assassination attempt on the Slovakian prime minister, he tonight remains in, I think it's serious condition.
Yeah, he's been upgraded to serious condition, but which was better than critical.
Yeah, so that tells me that he is likely to survive, which I think is good for the world, because we don't need more escalation and fueled by emotion.
Yeah, so I just looked here, and even the Russians say this guy is a hardliner who was involved in the execution of many people. And they're friends.
Yes. Yeah. And so I guess this the president of Iran was on his way back from an inaugural ceremony for a new dam that had been constructed on the border with Azerbaijan.
Yeah, and the foreign minister was on the same helicopter with them. Their head of oil, and I don't remember what else. There were like 3 heads of different, ministries on the helicopter with them. So, like 5 high-level guys.
And I think we misspoke earlier. I think we said that there were only 2 helicopters flying. There are actually 3. And then I remember maybe an hour and a half ago, because people are posting so much silly stuff online. I won't tell you who I saw it from, but it was on X, and the person who posted this said, "Why did only one helicopter crash?" Like, because only one crashed. That's why.
Yeah, maybe the other 2 had better pilots.
Could be, So
now we're going to go down the Prigozhin hole.
And anything to fuel speculation, right? And conspiracy. Why did only one of the 3 helicopters go down? Because that's what happened. So let's wait for some facts. So I guess the Red Crescent Society of Iran is out there with these crews, and we're seeing a lot of. I see these vehicles, video of military vehicles and cop cars everywhere, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what is this all about? Like, where are they going? They're all sitting on the side of a highway someplace. Like, they crashed in a mountainous area. You need like 300 vehicles to go rescue 5 guys. It doesn't make sense, the video that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I agree. I actually have that video here, so if I can find it again. Yeah.
It's like everybody panic and go out there, right? I Makes no sense. Like
That's it.
what?
Like half the country, you know,
know.
that's the whole clip, but
I don't get it. I don't understand.
You know,
Except you know what that remind I shouldn't make light of this. It reminds me of like watching little kids play hockey because I'm Canadian. And you know what little kids do when they first start playing hockey? When the puck goes into the corner, all the kids go into the corner, right? And then it goes into the other corner, and they all go over to the other corner. They don't play their position, so they just chase the puck around in a group. It's like bees to honey. But that's what that reminded me of.
I grew up close enough to the Canadian border. I did that.
Guilty as charged myself when I was a little kid. Yeah. Oh my.
Well, you know, by what we see, and again, you know, like that clip I just threw up there, it looks like a lot of vehicles and people there.
Yeah.
But can also be just camera angles. You know, the fog and rain, you know, all go away. We have a sunny day in the morning, and you know, they could probably cover 100 square kilometers in, you know, no time with all those people. And they'll fight over who gets to carry them down or something.
Yeah. When that kind of stuff goes on, things go wrong. I find, you know, that's not good. That's emotional. But this is media, so how much of that is really accurate? And I don't know. When you get stuff like this, I'm just always cautious.
So that clip I put up there was apparently 4 rescue teams. So, you know, and now you throw 50 Russian teams into that. Hey, got to be a mighty big, you know, pile of people up there. And of course, who knows what 50 rescue teams is from Russia? It could be 50 guys.
I suppose so, yeah. I suspect probably more than that. But maybe the reason they have so many is because when this began, they weren't really sure where it was. So they were maybe dispatched to a lot of different zones at the same time so that when they do finally pinpoint it, then they have a team in that zone to go in. Again, I'm speculating. I have no idea.
Yeah, well, they say all hospitals and rescue teams are on full alert. So
now there's a clear-cut case of preferential treatment in the healthcare system. See, if this was
really?
Canada...
You mean you don't think they'd do that for you and I?
Here in Canada, I'll tell you this: if you go to the waiting, if you go to the emergency department here, you're going to be there at least a day, waiting to get in and get out. You'll be there all day, maybe a day and a half. I'm not joking. Now, the Prime Minister, if you're Justin Trudeau, somehow I think he might get in and out a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
But it's like that everywhere, right?
Yeah. So, you know, you mentioned how old, you know, these helicopters would be. They entered production in the United States and Canada of the Bell 212 in 1998. But the Germans are using these same helicopters as air ambulances. And, you know, I was just looking here to see if I could find out if they were still building them in Italy. But I don't find that. You know, you're the Chat GPT guy, so you'd have to plug that in.
Actually, Chat GPT doesn't only goes up to a certain year. I'm not sure what year it is, but it's not current. So all the information you get, it's several years back.
It's not the all-encompassing take over the world thing?
Not yet. Not until next month.
Not next month,
the knowledge is growing exponentially, and then it becomes self-aware in June.
Yeah.
So let's just see what else I can find here on this. it seems to be fading from the headlines. Still missing. So with this now getting into the evening hours, I'm thinking that, well, I mean, they're not going to give up. They're going to try to get in there, even in darkness, right? So
I don't think in this weather they're going to do a whole lot. They're probably, we saw the video you showed of the guys, climbing up the hill in the fog, but I think it's going to fade from the headlines, at least over there, until, daylight rises over here in a few hours. And then I think it'll pick up again.
So what time would it be over there, Kevin? Any idea?
I believe they're an hour earlier than I am. Or the same time. Hour later or the same time.
So it's only about 1 or 2 a.m. over there.
3 o'clock here. It's 3:30 there. They're a half hour off from me.
So
in about 3 hours, I'd say.
And this crash happened, boy, it has to be now, what, 8, 10 hours? Something in that range?
Yeah, something like that.
8 to 10 hours, and harsh weather. If they've crashed, that means they probably don't have, who knows, like access to shelter or heat. Depends on how badly damaged the helicopter is.
Yeah. And if anyone's injured in that weather, it's probably not great.
Yes. So with every passing moment, the odds become worse for any survivors who might be there. And we know that someone survived because they were able to make contact with a person, but there's really no other information that has been provided beyond that, right?
Right. Yeah, so I looked here. The first report on this came out 11 hours ago.
11. So why, if they've made contact with someone, the first thing they're going to ask is everybody okay? They're going to find out if somebody's died, but they're not telling us. Why would they withhold that at this point, do you think?
That's why I said originally that supposedly, did somebody really contact them, or was that just somebody speaking out of turn? Like we both said already, if you're off in the middle of the mountains, is your cell phone going to work? Mm-hmm. And it was a cell phone call.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a dubious claim at best. And you'd think with 2 other helicopters there, supposedly flying relatively close together, there would have been some contact from another helicopter.
You would think. They must have been flying. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they didn't all leave together. Maybe they weren't flying in a group.
Yeah. Or maybe the fog was so thick that they couldn't see.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of reports out of Iran that, they're making a big deal that the helicopter went down due to poor visibility.
And I don't think we've shown a picture of the president, but here he is. This is an image that's being used on mainstream media with a helicopter behind him. I'm not certain I don't think that's the helicopter that he was in. It looks like a file photo to me.
That doesn't look like a Bell, yeah.
But, hey, any helicopter will do for the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this photo released by the Iranian Presidency Office. The president visits an exhibition of the Revolutionary Guard Navy capabilities in the southern port city of Bandar Abbas. This was February 2nd of this year, according to the caption. So it's a provided photo. And that's him.
Yeah, so I just looked here, and the Italians are still building this helicopter. It's used by the Italian Navy. So, this could be anywhere from 30, 40 years old to a relatively new helicopter.
Wow. Any statement at all from? I don't think we've seen anything come from the United States in terms of a statement at all at this point. Are you aware of anything?
The only thing that I saw was that the U.S. and one of the European countries were offering satellite imagery, but no statements.
Given the nature of the relationship right now, that's maybe the wisest thing, is to just say nothing.
Yeah.
Do you think? Yeah.
Regardless of whether they're given it or not.
So I'm just going to check and see what else we can find out in terms of different governments responding. So the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said the Secretary General is following reports of an incident with Iranian President Raisi's, is it Raisi or Raisa? It's spelled R-A-I-S-I, yeah, Raisi.
Yep,
Raisi's aircraft, so Canadian, with concern. He hopes for the safety of the president and his entourage. That's from a UN spokesperson. The Kuwaiti Foreign Ministry says in a statement, "We are closely following with concern the reports regarding the helicopter carrying the Iranian president and his accompanying delegation. Kuwait expresses its wishes for their safety and its support for the Islamic Republic of Iran in this critical situation."
Yeah.
There is a statement here as well from the Russian Foreign Ministry. I think you made brief reference to it, but the quote here that I have is, "Russia is ready to extend all necessary help in the search for the missing helicopter and the investigation of the reasons for the incident." Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova is the person who issued that statement.
Yeah, and then Putin did send 2 planes with rescue teams.
The Saudi Arabian Foreign Ministry says the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia affirms that it stands by the Islamic Republic of Iran during these difficult circumstances and is prepared to provide any assistance the Iranian services need. That's a statement from the ministry. It also said the Saudi government was following news reports regarding Raisi's helicopter with great concern.
Yeah.
And, so what have I got here? U.S. President Joe Biden, a spokesperson for Biden, Karine Jean-Pierre, told reporters aboard Air Force One that the president had been briefed on the situation and did not elaborate beyond that. The U.S. State Department says, "We are closely following reports of a possible hard landing of a helicopter in Iran carrying the Iranian president and foreign ministry." That's it.
Yeah, that's all I found too. I did find the report about them speaking to somebody on board the helicopter. It says Iranian officials have spoken to 2 people on the same helicopter as President Abraham Raisi since it crashed Sunday, according to Iranian Vice President for Executive Affairs, who told the semi-official Fars news agency. And because officials made contact several times with a passenger and member of the flight crew shortly after the crash, it appears that the incident was not severe. And then it goes on to say that the 3 helicopters were flying the same route when 2 of them lost contact with his helicopter. But I would consider that suspect anyway, because if they had had contact with multiple people, then you'd you'd think somebody would say, what's going on with the president and why don't they have contact with him now?
World War III.
Yeah.
Tactical nuclear weapons drills.
Yeah. We
by
can win
Russia.
a tactical nuclear war. Yeah.
Yeah. American warmonger politicians who also want to launch tactical nukes. Everybody wants to use tactical nukes. We've got people revisiting history, relitigating wars and assassination attempts, and now this.
They've got to use some of those tactical nukes. They're getting old. They have to build new ones, and they cost a lot of money to build. So,
fuel the economy by blowing up the world. Maybe build hotels instead. And I don't know. Anything. Because this, really, can it get any worse? Can we do anything else to bring us closer to Armageddon?
Don't even say it, Rick. Can we? Yeah, we can do lots of things to make it worse.
This is unbelievable. And it's sort of like we are the frog in the pot boiling, because when you think back 2 years ago, just the conflict in Ukraine, when that started, I was like, this has, enough explosive power to set off World War III. And we've been going through that, and then this situation in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, Gaza, everything's ramping up. And it just every day, it's something else that just, you kind of get through some crisis like this, like we're going through right now, and you're like, this could be it. And then everything seems to calm down. The reality is it hasn't calmed down at all. We just get used to it. It's just another thing that's stacked on top of another thing until we get to the point where it's like the needle on the that breaks the camel's back, right? So at what point do we get, what does it take to get us there? I don't want to find out, but it feels really, really, really unstable tonight.
Well, yeah, you ask what we can do to make it even more unstable and get closer to that. Let's start a conflict with China.
Yeah.
That's why I say it can get worse.
Yes. Yeah, and we're kind of on that road too, aren't we?
Yeah.
Oh,
we believe in one China policy, but let's sell weapons to Taiwan.
Yeah. It just, Kevin, I don't know, man. This is insane. And and Russia providing the hypersonic missiles. Iran has more newer technology than they've ever had before. The power balance has been sort of reset in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Israel, I think Israel is really in jeopardy here. I said right from the very beginning, don't go into Gaza heavy like that. It's a trap. It's stupid. You might win on the battlefield, but you'll lose the war overall. You're gonna lose by winning, because the other side's gonna win by losing, because the world you'll lose the support of the public. You can't do this, but they did.
Well, and then you debate if they're actually going to lose by winning, because it doesn't appear they're winning against Hamas. Mm-hmm. They're winning against the Palestinian people, but Hamas just keeps popping up from their underground tunnels all over. So I think it was doomed to fail from the beginning.
I don't know. This is, and you see, well, if it continues, if this escalates, they've just got everybody in the whole region just like it look like it. You show the pictures in Gaza, everything's leveled. They talk about the casualties, but so it looks like Israel's winning this ground war, but I don't think so, because you have everybody else in the region just ready to push them, frankly, into the sea. Just wipe them off the face of the planet. I don't know what they're going to do if it comes to that point.
Well, and Hamas has been building these underground tunnels for years. They've got underground, you see these things about, gee, we had to wipe out this hospital because they were treating Hamas guys there. Hamas has underground hospitals, underground ammunition storage, underground command centers. So you see all this rubble, and all they've done is created a Stalingrad situation. Now you have all this rubble all over the place, and these Hamas guys can pop up from their tunnels and, take pot shots at the Israelis and, duck back in. And, I think that was a losing proposition for them to go in like they did to begin with.
In many respects.
Yeah.
That's why you're seeing this division within the War Council, with Benny Gantz saying that if Netanyahu and the council doesn't adopt a different strategy for Gaza by June 8th, he'll resign. Now, he's an opposition politician, so he's getting some mileage out of it, but this does show that they're not really unified. And you're seeing massive protests continue as well. How organic that is, I can't say, but they're real. Netanyahu seems to be maybe yesterday's man. The winds of change, I think, are blowing. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, Rick. I think we're already in World War III. I think it won't be called that for, 20 or 30 years.
Yes. Definitely a different kind of war that we're living through right now, but I think you're right. And a lot
bring
of
it back to childhood?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Does it bring it back to childhood?
I don't understand. Does it bring me back to childhood?
Yeah, I mean, you, like I did, grew up with the, threat of World War III with the Soviet Union. And
for me, no, because this isn't like the Cold War. This is different. The Cold War was just something that we lived with. It was always there. But
you're worried about,
it was more about espionage, right? Theft of secrets. After World War II, America had the bomb. Russia wanted the bomb. We had military secrets. They had military secrets. They develop a weapon. We'd try and steal that technology, and vice versa. So there was that kind of spycraft going on, but it was a different environment. Then you get into sort of the Reagan era, and the Bush era, and you have more terrorism, right? So then things change again. The dynamics of and you move into a unipolar geopolitical reality because the Soviet Union falls, the Berlin Wall comes down. So that felt a lot different too. And I'll tell you, like personally, I never really, I didn't during the Cold War feel threatened. I was never walking around freaking out, thinking that we were going to die or that it was really going to happen. It was sort of there, but no, never really thought it was going to come to it. I think right after World War II, maybe during the 50s, there was more concern about it when people were building bomb shelters in their backyards. But you get into the 70s and people had sort of just learned to live with it. So that's when I grew up. I don't know. Was that your experience too?
Well, that was my experience too. I'm, probably thinking more back to, like you say, the 50s or 60s, the Cuban Missile Crisis and,
Yeah.
All that was probably very similar to things like this. But this is, like you say, a far different type of war even going on all over the world. The weapons are much more advanced, more destructive. The intelligence, the propaganda, all of it is just at, a much higher level.
Yes, I've been saying it here on the program for a while. This is an information war as much as anything else. I think the information war might actually be the most important aspect of this war, because you could be winning the war on the battlefield handily, and the public, you could sell the public the opposite story, and then undermine support for the war for the other side using information warfare, and then funding is cut off, or that the public demands that the troops be called home or whatever, and then the war is just lost. Even though you might be winning, the public might think otherwise. So the information war is critical in this, and that's what we're seeing. I can't, and with artificial intelligence, sometimes I can't, we can't tell sometimes what's real and what isn't anymore.
Yeah. And, the other difference is, through the Cold War, news was spread considerably slower. It was all print media, radio. The stories took a while to get to, the places to be distributed. Now just instantaneous.
There was much less volume of information because it was coming through, legacy media, newspapers, radio, television. The velocity of the information was also slower, I would say. I think that's true because with social media, it's shared instantaneously, shared out, right? So you get this really hyper acceleration in terms of information velocity. So you can get stuff going viral within literally minutes, not days. So it's a whole new
information
ballgame.
overload.
Yes.
So much of it coming in. So for the mental health of our audience, they should all quit watching all news other than us.
That's right. That's good tip. That's right. Just watch us 24/7. Go watch all the old episodes. There's plenty on there. Man, so information velocity. What are the other aspects of this?
They've kind of taken the human element out of a lot of the war as well with all this drone warfare. You've got a lot of young guys who have never seen the battlefield that are basically playing explosive video games.
Yeah. Yeah. That adds that makes it even deadlier because old style warfare, you had to kind of brainwash people by dehumanizing the enemy.
Yeah.
Pejorative slurs, racial slurs, describe them as, and we've seen it even with, both sides in these conflicts, calling the other side animals, right? That's just what's done in order to motivate your soldiers so that they don't think of the enemy as a human being. It's just a nuisance, a rodent, a vermin that needs to be killed, right? So that's what you do. But now when you sanitize the entire experience by turning it into something you're just watching through a video screen, it makes it a whole lot easier for the soldier or drone operator to push the button and kill people, maybe even halfway around the world, the other side of the planet.
Just a blip on the screen, yeah.
Yes. And when I think back to the history of television, the history of media, Vietnam, that was really the first war that really came into people's houses, on homes, on television, through the 6 o'clock news. And the United States That was one of the reasons they had so much trouble in Vietnam, is because people could see the horrors of war on that screen every single night, and it undermined support for the war at home. That's why one of the things that generated the anti-war protests domestically. So we're seeing a lot of that here now. The thing I really find distasteful, though, is I do see videos, and I have to say they're really coming mostly from Hamas, these produced videos where they're showing soldiers being killed, and they're heavily produced with graphics and fancy editing, special effects, music. And when I'm watching them, it's like it becomes entertainment. And they're entertaining people using it as a propaganda tool. It's not raw footage, it's edited. It glorifies the violence. I find it really distasteful, and I see honestly some online. Well, they say they're journalists, but I'm not going to call them that. But they're using these videos in their reports and telling people that this is journalism. No, it's not. That's radical. That's being used to radicalize people, to pull them over to a pro-war side on one side of the equation. I really don't like it.
I constantly get people who argue with me when I point out that Hamas uses a lot of propaganda. It was probably 2-3 months ago, somebody sent me this photo saying, well, look how awful this was. Israel hit an ambulance that was carrying an injured person in it. And when I looked at this, the first thing that struck me, and this is what people don't look at, is the details. But you had the burned out ambulance with, rubble all over the place. But then you had a pristine, stretcher, wheels and all on it in front of the ambulance. And it's like, now, how did it get blown up by a missile? And that thing flew out the back of the ambulance, tumbled over a couple of times in front with no damage. And, people argued with me about it. So people just aren't, there's so much coming in that it's hard to stop and look at the details. I saw a report earlier today about Blinken, who, all the text under it, and people were going wild with this, confirming that the Ukrainian elections were canceled forever. And this is what people were going on about. Yet if you listen to Blinken, is what he said is the Ukrainian elections are postponed until the end of the military operation, which is constitutionally what the Ukrainian constitution says. Elections are not allowed to be occurring during a time of martial law. So, you hear all this propaganda about, particularly out of, my side of the world, that he will, Zelensky will no longer be the legal president end of day, well, for me today, the 20th, that this is the end of his term. He's no longer really the president. Well, according to their constitution, he is, because their martial law extends through the end of August.
Yeah. Well, there's another guy that they've tried to kill several times, unsuccessfully.
Yeah.
He's got a target on his back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody wants to kill everybody, it seems. Well,
yeah.
Not everybody. I don't want to kill anybody. Wow. Well, Kevin, I think that we've kind of covered the bases on this. Is there anything you think we've missed?
I don't think so. I think we've gone above and beyond on this one. I think, it's 3:30 here. 4 o'clock in Iran. It'll start getting light in another hour there, and I think we'll have another lively day of news tomorrow.
Yes. Well, I'm sure they will get to the location where this crash has happened if they're not there already. And I'm sure that by this time tomorrow, we'll have a much clearer picture of what has happened over there. At least I hope it's clearer. But we'll have more information.
Yeah.
And it'll be clearer, I think, where we're likely going with this. I'm not sure we're going to get truth, but we'll know where they want to take us with it.
That's a good bet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us on the program. A privilege as always, and I really appreciate your insight and perspective.
Always my pleasure to be on with you, Rick.
Okay, and I will be back in a few minutes with our feature interview. Pelle Neroth Taylor will join us to recap Eurovision and talk about some of these same political and military issues as well. So stay with me. I'll be right back. And again, Kevin, thank you, sir.
Yep.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
So before we get into this with Pelle Neroth Taylor, I'm just going to preview or preface all this and just give you a little bit of information, just in case you're not clued in, because this is about Eurovision. This is where we're going to start the conversation with him. Eurovision, this music contest held this year in Sweden, Malmo. That's where Pelle grew up. Huge event. Not supposed to be political, but very political. I mean, steeped in politics, controversy. The issue this year, front and center, attracting massive numbers of protesters, filling the streets. Gaza. The Palestinian issue. So, here's what it looked like during the Eurovision Festival in Malmo, where we saw about 20,000 protesters during the event, May 7th to May 11th. This is what it looked like on the streets. Here we go. So, all that going on. Also, a celebrity was there. Greta Thunberg. She was arrested. Climate change activist, now focused on the Palestinian issue. But hey, one issue is as good as another, right?
Washington genocide! Stop whitewashing the genocide! Shame on you! 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 Shame on you!
And the event attracts competitors from all over Europe and Israel, and that's why the protesters were there. They were really there protesting the participation of Eden Golan, who was representing Israel. Actually, she's originally a Russian, but representing Israel. And the winner actually was from Switzerland this year. I don't want to run this clip, but I'm going to show you a picture of the winner. Nemo is the winner's name, from Switzerland. I'm going to show you the picture because you'll want this context as we get into this conversation with Pelle. And one of the other main issues, or I don't know if it's an issue so much. I guess, yeah, it's the focus is LGBTQS plus rights, and it's just integrated, because the event itself has become so incredibly progressive. A couple of years ago, it was Russia that was banned from Eurovision because of the war in Ukraine. And let me see if I've got the other clip here of Eden Golan. I don't really want. I just want to avoid running the music because I don't want to get a copyright strike on us here. But she returned home to Israel after really enduring a lot of heckling, a lot of protests. It was greeted warmly at the airport when she returned home to Israel. Let me see if I can find you the clip of that. Oh, and, well, anyway. Here's another. Here, I'll show you some video of her singing. This is after the event. She came in 5th, ultimately. Was riding high in votes initially. But she was booed on stage. There are some who are saying that the producers of the event tried to mask over those boos with produced audio to make it sound like she was being cheered. And I've heard both versions. I think there's some truth to that. Definitely she was heckled and booed by the crowd. But this is after the Eurovision event, and she sings a song with pictures of the hostages who have not yet returned home. And again, I don't want to let that run because we will get hit with a copyright strike, I'm sure. So there's all of this. So this prefaces everything, but there's a lot more to this story. And now that we have a little bit of hindsight to assist us, we're going to get into this interview with Pelle, who will give us a broader perspective. He was there for the entire event, and he will share with us his thoughts, his perspectives, and it's his hometown. This town, Malmo, huge Muslim population there now, large Muslim community, because the immigration issue has really become, Malmo is sort of a hub for that. And it's one of the largest communities of its type in the world, really, diasporas for Muslim residents. So that's why these protests were also so heightened against Israel and against Eden Golan. So stay with me. When we come back, we'll get right into this thing. Pelle is coming up right after this.
The New World Order. Government overreach. The Great Reset. Mainstream media lies. Now more than ever, independent voices are needed. Donate now at freedomreporters.com. That's freedomreporters.com. Maverick News, the antivirus program for your mind.
Pelle, thank you so much for joining us on the program again today. You went down to Eurovision. How long were you there?
I was there for 4 days, and I was it's the town where I grew up, Malmo, or partly grew up. So it was, I had a flat I could go to, which is my flat my mother's had for decades. So I actually grew up in that flat. And then I went down to the center and I did a couple of my regular broadcasts on my show. And then I tried to mainstream it, so all my monologues, I talked about Eurovision as a sort of European cultural event, the only thing that ties us together in a way, like the campfire, much more so than the European elections, which are coming up in the beginning of June. And I tried to make a thing out of it and perhaps also smuggle in some of my own past memories. But, it was a kind of a dank experience. I went down to the center where they had a Eurovision village in the Eurovision city. They converted one of the old folk parks. And our folk parks are a specific Swedish tradition. There used to be hundreds of them in Sweden. Sometime in the most rural, small forest town, there'd be a stage where bands would tour, and the Swedish top, they call it, the Swedish top 20, and they'd go for years and sometimes decades touring these folk parks. And it was very much a workers' thing, folk meaning the people. And that's where ABBA started their career. I think they did tours of about 150, just like the Beatles had Hamburg, ABBA had the folk parks. And many other Swedish bands that are famous perhaps in Europe, but not nearly as well known as ABBA. And this particular folk park is right in the center of Malmo and right in the center of the Muslim quarter. So it'd been turned into Eurovision village with some of these sort of gay-friendly kind of iconography, and pink posters everywhere. And these rather sort of unhappy-looking, Arab couples or families pushing prams, and just sort of it had a very sort of odd, dislocated. It's like a sort of a night out in Bangalore or something. I mean,
so it's safe to say you don't really recognize your hometown anymore.
No, not at all. I mean, the Eurovision Song Contest when I grew up was as stolid as you can imagine, and it was an era of 2-channel television, and Swedish television was the most boring TV outside the East Bloc, very, very worthy. And then, so the Eurovision Song Contest came on once a year, and everybody gathered to watch it. And it was the only time when television broadcast after 11 p.m. When Swedes went to America, they would always talk about the hundreds of channels on offer and the amazing plethora of choice there. But the 2 channels, and then they had this Eurovision Song Contest once a year. And it was sort of singers from Luxembourg, and they had talking in 3 languages, 12 points, 12 punkter, 12 points. That was the maximum score. And it was it was a very family-oriented ceremony, and it represented, I guess, a more stolid Europe. And the fact that people in my generation in Sweden stay up to watch it showed that I had to get out of Sweden. I thought, I can't stay in this place. It's so boring. So, I went to England where my father's from and spent the rest of my youth there. And of course, England had a fantastic pop scene, as did America. But I mean, to me, that was like triumph of British culture over European, or Scandinavian, boring bourgeois culture. But now I rather miss that sort of, stolid European, whatever you like it, with beautiful French chanteurs singing in their language. I think French was the dominant language, even more than English in the 70s and 80s. And now it's like this kind of gay freak show festival, transgender. I mean, two of the top contestants were transgender. They're just guys, but, surfing the zeitgeist. And then it's become sort of since the East Europeans joined after the end of the Cold War, it's become very divided into voting blocks, cultural voting blocks. So if you're a small country in the Balkans, you'll get all the votes from your neighbors, and so they stick together and they often do quite well. And they have this kind of polka rock, whatever they call it, Balkan rock, very specific kind of music. And then the Scandinavians vote for each other, but no one votes for the Brits. So even though the Brits put in not very good music, and the French, it's the small countries that get the chance to hit bigger powers on the head. And Britain doesn't take it very seriously, and lets it be known that it doesn't take it seriously, and doesn't field very good candidates. So it often ends up near the bottom of the scale. So the world's second largest music exporter, Led Zeppelin, Beatles, David Bowie, everything, they don't get anywhere in Eurovision. But so Sweden usually does quite well because they take it very seriously, and they've infiltrated the management of Eurovision. So quite a lot of those people are Swedes who run the thing, and of course it's hosted. And then they do. The Swedes are very good at music. I think they have a very large sort of deep structure of a singing tradition, very advanced music producers. There's that guy Max Martin, who Madonna. I mean, a lot of American pop stars go to Stockholm to get their music tweaked by pop producers there. And I said Max Martin is a Swedish-based producer. He's had more hits than anyone else in the world, I think, apart from John Lennon and Paul McCartney. But it's usually credited to the American pop star. And to me, it's completely bland music. But so the Swedes have definitely cracked the American pop formula, and that's part of their contribution to Western culture. But to me, it's completely bland. But there's a lot of good Swedish pop music as well. And so they usually do and they put in some good acts, so they usually do well. And so they won last year's show in Liverpool, and then they're given the right to host this one. And the guy who won it, well, Israel was favored by some, and Ukraine. And of course, there's a lot of controversy because Israel is not in Europe for a start. And obviously the Gaza war. So Russia is excluded, but Israel hasn't been. So there were big demonstrations because Malmo is one of the most Muslim cities in Europe, I think. It's like Marseille or something. And a lot of people thought there was going to be a terrorist attack. Shin Bet, the head of the domestic Israeli security service, actually turned up in person and made sure that, because this Eden Golan, who was the singer, actually a Russian girl originally, but with a sort of Russian surname, and rebaptized herself Golan after the Golan Heights. She was favored to be one of the winners, and she did quite well with the voting public. But anyway, she was guarded by Israeli special forces. But the Swedes put in a good effort with their police, because they knew that their reputation is on the line. They know that their reputation is no longer sort of pretty girls and blonde girls, but violence and gang warfare and a society that's been destroyed by immigration. So they know that.
This is so strange. It's supposed to be this was always portrayed as an event that is not political at all, and yet it seems completely steeped in politics.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a sort of exactly. I mean, you go into Google Scholar and you type in Eurovision politics, you get loads of papers. I mean, there are many scholars sitting at European universities writing. They do these diagrams of who votes for whom, and they do statistical analysis to show, which countries are truly allied with each other in terms of their congruent culture, and it's all very tactical. As I said, who you vote for and who's, and now it's also some people believe that we're run by Satanists and the trans movement. Well, I mean, there's a satanic performer from Ireland, and the Irish in particular, being a very conservative society once upon a time, and now come out as a mass immigration society, and they hate their leaders. And so that the idea that they're run by Satanists is even more strongly flourishing in Ireland than in other places. And they turn up with a performer, doesn't sing old Irish crooners, but she's a sort of Bambi thug, with literally dressed up as a devil, and other people wearing horns and stuff. And you think, what's happened to Ireland? So that's one of them. And then you had the transgender guy who actually from Switzerland, did quite a good song, to be fair. Nemo, I think. Yes, and that was called The Code. And so you have lots of amateur analysts. I mean, I don't subscribe to this world idea that we're run by Satanists, but what do I know? I mean, I've been reading up. I talked to a guy who did the followed the what's his name, the Epstein story. So maybe we are run by Satanists, but the idea that it's the code wins the song, and he's a transgender. So what is the lyrics that in the code? Is that because we're being coded by the globalists to become, adopt digital currencies and become slaves of the globalist machine or whatever? So people are already talking about that, I think. So, and they think it's all a gigantic. So other people think it's a gigantic CIA psyop. I mean, we know that the 1970s you had this Operation Mockingbird, where CIA ran news magazines and journalists and so on. And why hasn't we heard about Mockingbird 2.0? Well, that's because they infiltrate the music industry and use that. It's a fantastic opportunity if you are a propagandist and want to reach a large number of people with certain messages. That's certainly the way to do it. Just like Brussels is often used as a one-stop shop for American legislators. Big corporations want to change European policy, they go to the single one-stop shop, which is Brussels, not to the individual jurisdictions. Well, Eurovision is sort of a cultural one-stop shop, so they're certainly pumping out messages that a lot of, like TNT's viewers, people, like normal people, think is abhorrent and is imposed on them and comports with all these rumors that we're run by really bad people, Anyway.
The thing is, it's culture and politics really do mix, and if you want to drive a political message, I don't know if there's any more powerful way to do it than through art and music.
That's right. What is that saying? Culture is culture is upstream from politics. Politics is downstream from culture. It's an offshoot of culture. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I really hadn't paid attention to any of these artists before, but when I went to find out who Nemo is, there he is on the stage in a skirt and some feathery costume thing, and I'm like, okay, I get it. It's very progressive.
Yeah, I think that it's always been very popular with the gay movement. It's decades back, and maybe some of the people who manage it are disproportionately gay. So, but I think it is partly political. Transgender is really in fashion at the moment. So if you're a singer and you say you're transgender, that gives a few extra points. But yes, it's intensely political. It's much bigger. I thought that with Eurovision came of age in the 70s and 80s, as said, when we lived in a social democratic Europe with 2 state-run TV channels in most countries, and everything was quite ordered and safe, and there was no cable TV, none of the fantastic variety of entertainment options that we've got now. No Netflix, forget all that. Things closed down at 11, then people went up to work, started work at 6 in the morning in their factory, sort of thing. But now Eurovision has got adapted with the times. It's become a bigger event and more political and more of a talking point than when so it's compared to MTV and Netflix and everything. It stands out as a European event, perhaps the only European event on the international media stage. Although I think it's completely unknown in America, North America, and rightly so. There's no reason why you should watch it. A lot of Europeans do talk about it, and it's sad. I said, I mean, we're the continent that created Beethoven and Mozart and Shakespeare and I don't know, Beatles and Michelangelo, and here we have the Eurovision Song Contest. In some ways, it's also a sign of our decline. I mean, most of my culture is American. I mean, books and ideas. It's just like, as I said, America, the Anglosphere, but especially America, such a fantastic engine of intellectual innovation for me in my areas. Although I prefer British music, to be honest, still. It is a sort of, and it's, I don't know.
But the dominant issue this year was Gaza.
That's right.
How big were those protests?
Well, there's something like 20,000, I think, 10,000. I didn't actually go down there because I had to come down and then I was kind of really exhausted and I had to prepare for my show. But I've got a guy I work with, Patrick, who's helped me who was the cameraman and the editor of my film Sweden Dying, and the second film, which was also about how Malmo became Islamized. And he's went down and filmed a lot of the stuff. But it was quite peaceful. I mean, you know how the media works. They'll focus on the very small number of arrests, and you can't get that. But I watched a lot of rather peaceful footage, you know. And I don't think even the worst detractors of the event would say that it was badly policed, you know, or that there were some of my interviewees on the TNT show thought, oh, there's going to be a terror attack. But to be honest, I never really thought that. And I thought that, I thought that, and Malmo felt more good-natured than you might think, judging by the taxi drivers I took, sort of thing.
Well, you mentioned arrests, and I saw that Greta Thunberg was arrested.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that had much of an impact?
No,
in the news cycle?
I don't know. I don't think. I mean, neither here nor there. I can't draw any conclusions from that because I'm not on that track, as it were. But maybe others will say it's a bigger thing than it was. But she kind of turns up at all these things.
Yes.
No, I think no. It's. I mean, there was a guy who did Muhammad art. He did portraits of Muhammad. Denmark had one, and Sweden had one. Did I talk about this last time? And he died in a car crash, and that might have been a terror attack, maybe by Iran or something. That they modified his car or something, sent some signal so that it speeded up and crashed into the middle of a motorway. And because he also did these copies of Mona Lisa and other famous artworks. But he'd smuggle little faces of Muhammad into this other artwork, you know, like artists do as a kind of secret signature. But he did it to taunt Muslims, you know, and I'm very supportive of his work and everything. So that might have been a terror attack. But I don't know. I think the Swedes arrested the usual suspects, you know, or they kept them under surveillance. I mean, these gang members or whatever. Because as I said, I think the Swedes knew that their reputation was on the line, and they knew where the gangsters were, as it were. So I didn't feel that it was going to heading into a kind of conflict between Israel. I said it partly so that I could just host a show there, but that wasn't the focus, and nothing did happen in the end.
So these massive protests, coupled with all the protests we've been seeing on university campuses, just in the streets around the world, do you think I have to wonder, I'll get your opinion on this. It seems like there is a shift happening with public opinion. This, I think, is having some impact because today Joe Biden stood up at a commencement ceremony at a post-secondary institution and called for a ceasefire. The language was the strongest yet in that regard. What's your opinion? Are these protests, did the Eurovision protests have an impact globally, do you think, on public opinion?
No, I don't think they had an impact globally, but they were just a sign of a general... I'm not the expert on the... I don't feel strongly, like my news editor is really, really pro-Palestinian, and I'm a bit more agnostic. I'm anti both sides, to be honest. But I mean, I think that a lot of the protests are genuine. I mean, I know, for instance, like in Georgia, in the country Georgia, they're talking about an incipient color revolution that is sponsored by the American embassy. So it's not impossible. Some people in America think that the campus protests are sponsored by China, or somehow they all got identical tents and they all identical talking points or whatever. But I think there might be some of that, but I think there's a lot of genuine opinion. I mean, today's young, for better or worse, have been brought up into sort of ideas of peaceful harmony and multiculturalism, and they're just acting out according to that, you know. And so I think that the Israeli attitudes of, well, you know, you bombed us, you bombed Dresden, you killed the native Indians, you killed the blacks in Africa, so don't you Westerners come and talk to us. It doesn't go down well. I mean, they're applying a morality. They say, well, we're allowed to kill them because of they're not allowed to. They attacked us, and they should have known that we'd strike back. So it's their fault. And civilians die in all wars. Mm-hmm. And that's I talked to on my show very pro Israeli commentator who's opinion editor of the Washington Times, and she'd just come back from Israel, and she more or less said that's what they're saying. We're allowed to kill people because you did back then in the 1940s for the greater cause, for the greater good. The evil Nazism, you bombed German cities, or you firebombed Tokyo, and so on, and we should be allowed to do the same. Whatever the truth of that is, it doesn't go down well at all in our kind of I don't know, what do you want to call it, pacifist Western societies, even America, which is everyone in the West thinks you're from Mars, we're from Venus, sort of thing. If we talking to Americans, I don't think younger Americans like that at all. So I think the opinion is strongly going against Israel, and I think that's genuine. I think they're out of, Netanyahu's 75 years old. It's another generation, another mentality that prevails in the West. So I think,
yes.
And that's why I wonder if Israel is going to find a way out militarily now with Glantz, one of the war cabinet ministers, saying that. So there's splits inside the Israeli cabinet, whether the Israelis will find a deus ex machina or some kind of other solution, which is, let's say, assassinating the president of Iran by shooting down his helicopter, if it turns out to be like that,
Yeah, well, we're already seeing a lot of social media posts out there speculating in that way, and a lot of social media influencers suggesting that is the case already. And as we're sitting here talking about it, these are not established facts at all. It's a lot of spin at this point. So I'm sitting back trying to wait for facts. I don't know if we will ever actually get facts that will help us determine what the truth is.
Well, it could be that even if it were the case, the Iranians will try and talk it down. The Iranians are very much talking up the very bad weather and the fog and so on. So they're giving themselves a let out, or the Israelis a let out, because I think the Iranians absolutely do not want war. So on the official media, they haven't talked about that at all, and we know why, because they don't. It's news management, isn't it? But there's no indications. Yes, I think the Israeli, the president Khamenei, or the supreme leader, he says, called calm, and everything continues as normal. It's not impossible that it's an internal job. It's not impossible. And it's also interesting because that guy, the Israeli security minister, what a lot of people don't realize about Israel is it's not the same country as it was 20 or 30 years ago. They've had huge numbers of Middle Eastern Jews settling in the country. So it doesn't have that European flavor it had before. And these are more right-wing or more extremist, if you like, more religious than these Ashkenazis from Europe. So the new cabinet, Netanyahu's cabinet, is comprised of several of these people. And I think is it named Zvir or something? He's the security minister. He's a guy saying we got to kill these guys. Tooth for a tooth, Middle Eastern mentality that he's. But he was in a car crash, and then another guy was in a crash just 2 days later. So was that the Israelis, Mossad, sending a warning signal to its own ministers, or was it Iranians doing it, and now the Israelis doing it in revenge to the Iranian president? I don't know. Or similarly, if the Iranian president is seen as a hardliner, is Iranian intelligence? Sometimes they're quite progressive, these intelligence services. Like the KGB was more progressive or more liberal, funnily enough, than the rest of Soviet society, because they're more educated and they were trying to push changes on. So what were they trying to take out an obstacle to change in Iran? It's just a guess. I know very little about Middle Eastern politics. It's just a guess.
Well, one way or another, we're seeing a very, very public cracks in the unity on the war council, because Benny Gantz has that deadline of June 8th, where he wants a different direction taken in Gaza. He's laid that on the line for Netanyahu. And there are many layers to that. There's a political aspect to it. There's probably a strategic element to it. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm not sufficiently informed about it, except to say that Israel, they seem to be stuck, basically, and they don't. The CIA have been saying for months that the Americans have been pouring cold water on the Israelis behind the scenes, saying they don't really seem to know what they're doing and have an exit strategy. And I guess what he's saying kind of comports with what that belief is, that I think that demonstration, and when Iran attacked Israel the other day, and most of the missiles were intercepted by the Americans, of course. Yes. I think that was a clear demonstration of the new power dynamic in the Middle East. I think they're not these towel heads sort of thing. They're really quite sophisticated now, and they've got much better politically organized. The Saudis and the Iranians got together. Of course, they've got China behind them and Russia as well, and probably advising on strategy for all I know. And they're much better entrenched in bed. I mean, the Iran is no longer sort of fight. It was a country that was suffering from the after effects of the Iran-Iraq war for many years, but now they've got their nuclear program, whatever it is, under. They've been preparing for confrontation with Israel for decades, although I don't think they're seeking it. So they're quite well prepared, and apparently they've got a lot of advanced hypersonic missiles that could strike Tel Aviv. And yes. Israel is geographically a very small country, so it is very vulnerable. And maybe the smarter people inside Israel realize that, and if they took on Hezbollah, they might have to face Iran, and if they attack Rafah, Gantz would leave. So Netanyahu has people on his left and on his right in his cabinet who would peel off whatever he did in a way. So there's this sort of lack of going forward. But then there's a really good commentator called Alistair Crook, who's the most insightful one I've ever heard, actually. He's a former MI6. He's a hostage negotiator. He's really worth listening to. But he talks about the trouble is with Israel is that the public opinion is behind the kind of policies that Netanyahu, although they don't like Netanyahu himself and they think he was weak, or they didn't protect Israel sufficiently. I think that there's a feeling that they want to go all in. I mean, they're very, very hawkish, is public opinion, in total contrast to the rest of the world. So, American Jews, especially young Jews, are quite dovish, quite anti-Israeli. They want a peaceful resolution, but young Israelis are very pro confrontation and escalation and everything. So I just don't know what they'll do. Have you
Yes.
any? Yeah, I don't know if you got any thoughts on that.
Well, I've been thinking about it a lot over just the last day, and my thoughts go back to the war in Iraq with the United States, Operation Desert Storm, the invasion of Kuwait, and what Saddam Hussein was saying at that time. He echoes today, because he was talking back then about, he had a vision of the Arab states aligning against Israel at that time. And he was very paranoid about Israel attacking Iraq, and of course saw Israel and the United States as being unified and a big obstacle to the progression of Arab nations over there. And much of what he prophesized, I guess you could say at the time, or envisioned for the future, has come to pass. Not in exactly the way that he envisioned it, because he saw the rise of like Japan and Germany as being sort of the economic threat to the United States in the long run, but it hasn't really turned out that way. It's been more, now it's China, Russia, the BRICS nations, but it's still, the result is the same. And you've seen this galvanization now of these Arab nations against Israel in much the way that he envisioned that. And so October 7th, for me, it marks a milestone, or the beginning of a new chapter, where we're seeing the emergence of a multipolar geopolitical reality that is all new, and the United States will need to deal with that in a real way now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just because I'm sort of critical of immigration, and I don't deny that the multipolar world is happening. You've got to deal with the reality, and not as you want it to be. And in a lot of respects, I mean, there's some I have deep respect for a lot of the great cultures of the world, and they have been in the audience, and the Americans and the Brits and the Canadians have been prancing around on the stage, as it were, and everyone else has to clap politely. I mean, in cultural terms, I mean, that can't go on. I mean, these are fantastic. The French produce almost nothing that is watched in the Anglo world. It's just, even though this is a fantastic cultural country, Germany, Russia, ditto, China, India. So yeah, I mean, the Anglos have got to make way, and they can't just. There's a lot of criticism in the alternative media in the way that the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, against Yugoslavia, against Rwanda, is just kangaroo courts run for the benefit of the Americans. And when you know, I mean, if you're not the hegemon and you're in a world of a multipolar world, how do you deal with it? Do you deal with it daggers drawn? Mutual terror, mutual escalation, or some kind of unstable equilibrium of armaments? Or do you have some kind of international order based on, let's say, the United Nations? That doesn't mean the United Nations runs things like, I mean, I know some of the people who are hosts on TNT think it's the UN is this global government. But as a place where you can just make agreements to avoid the enormous cost of armaments, and that requires maybe some kind of international law. So if we do have an international criminal court, not one that just, what the Chinese, Russians are saying is the rules-based international order is just your rules, and we have to follow your rules. It's not real rules. It's like we have to have a rules-based which is neutral as to the perpetrator. I mean, if it's objective, so rules say you can't do that. That applies to the Americans too. So or we have some other solution. I'm not saying that's the only possibility, but in a world where there might be 3 or 4 power centers or 5 or whatever, we got to, unless we're going to be vaporized in radioactive dust, we've got to find some way to do something, I think.
Yeah.
That's not being a dove or a wussy or a wimp or a foreigner lover, I think it's just being realistic.
It is a struggle between two different visions for the future. On the one side, I think you have this sort of neo-nationalism with, the BRICS nations, Russia, where they want to maintain their sovereignty. They don't want to be under the thumb of an international rules-based order. On the other side, you have this sort of if you want to use globalist vision, where you have this global entity or some sort of legal structure, but then of course you're dealing with the erosion of national sovereignty. So it's it's a very difficult road to navigate.
Well, but it's also I think that the globalism, I don't know if we've talked about it, but globalism is sort of the remnant in a way of the British Empire, if you like. And what I see the Trump movement as being is like the 1776 all over again, and he appeals to the same kind of people who had been rebels against the British Empire in 76, which is the heartland, the old farming class of America, who are sort of nationalists in their own way, and like they see New York and Washington. So the British Empire didn't die completely. It left the UK, just as the Roman Empire left Rome and settled in Byzantium or Istanbul, as we now know it. The British Empire changed accent. It left London and settled in New York and Washington. But the New York, London, Washington triangle has persisted as a central force in politics. But those globalists are not necessarily. So the Americans are revolting against their own imperialism. That's how I see the whole Trump thing, and that's why the Democrats have become the party of Washington and of the deep state and of empire, if you like.
Yes, yeah,
something like that.
And I'm not exactly sure yet. I haven't quite figured out exactly where RFK Jr. fits into the equation there.
I'm not sure either. No, I think I haven't read up more this on RFK since we last spoke, actually. But he's a bright candidate for sure, and I'd consider voting for him.
When for me, as I sit and look at him, he seems very traditional in a lot of his views, but the people around him are very, very progressive. When I look at all of his supporters, his campaign team, it makes me wonder kind of where he'll end up, where he would end up on these issues if he were actually to win the election. But I think even now that's a long shot just because of the way the system works.
Well, as said, he apparently he said yes to being vice president, but Trump said no. So they would have been an unbeatable combination. But Trump's ego got in the way because RFK was too bright. That's the thing that worries me about Trump is his poor taste in subordinates. People who seem to, why do so many people end up hating him? That shows very poor judgment because if you're that powerful, you can choose people who both have good judgment, I think, and who kind of like you. He's got a stable, good family who seem to love him. So, and a lot of his employees seem to like him. I don't know if he's trying to have what Lyndon Baines Johnson said, better to having them inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. And maybe he wants to get his enemies, people like John Bolton and what's his name, that lawyer Michael Cohen. God, he really seems to hate his former boss, But yeah.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that it almost seems like political theater to me, and a form of reality television. I was saying the other day, he complains about having to sit in the courtroom, and that's taking up campaign time. But in reality, he has access to the media every single day here in the United States, and so these trials give him a platform. He's every single day. If you go to any of the mainstream media sites, websites, he's got the top headline. They just follow his. It's like reality television. It's the National Enquirer,
right,
on television.
Right.
Oh my goodness. So the Eurovision thing, what do you think the long-term impact from that will be? Will this just be something that people forget about now that the news cycle is just about complete, and then we move on to next year to the next issue?
I tried to make a thing out of it for 4 days, and that's more than it probably really deserves. Because I tried to bring in ABBA as well, and everybody loves ABBA, and it's the 50th anniversary of their Waterloo hit. And ABBA represented the good Sweden, if you like, the more blonde Sweden, if you like. So I tried to make a cultural event on my own show out of it, partly because I grew up in the town and I have partly Swedish origins and it's big in Sweden. But, for many, it was a one-day event. It wasn't even a 4-day event. And of course, until next year, there'll be a flurry of stories. But I guess it was unusual because of Israel's participation. Probably did have a higher profile than it has most years. But as you said, the news cycle grinds on, and it's already yesterday's story, Eurovision. So today it's Iran, whatever. The latest, the Beijing summit of Xi and Putin, and God knows what else.
Well, 2 years ago, it was the big issue was Russia being banned from Eurovision because of the conflict in Ukraine. I think most people have now forgotten about that, even though it's still ongoing.
That's
now
right.
they've been focused on this year, and yet I think Russia was still excluded from the competition this year, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, the Ukrainians won last year largely because of the sympathy vote, and they weren't able to host it, and that's why it took place. No, they won 2 years ago, and then it took place in Liverpool because in the UK because Ukraine wasn't able to host it, and they always end up in the top 3. But I mean, the Russians. I mean, I think in Europe, the Ukrainian war is still very much the topic of the moment, more than Israel, because we're only a few hundred kilometers from the Russian border, and but I think in some ways that war is sort of de-escalating. Actually, I think that I followed very, very closly. There was talk a week or two ago about NATO sending in troops, and I think that's actually less likely now. And I think that Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary, said we're going to send our missiles into Russian territory, and I think they walked back on that as well. And I don't think Ukraine is going to be invited into NATO this summer, and I don't think No, I think. Well, yeah. So I think it's and Russia's making gains, and I think that even the mainstream media are now saying that Ukraine doesn't have the manpower and the industrial capacity. So there's that stage of realization. I mean, I said we should have. My view on the war is that there could have been Ukraine could have been like Finland, Austria in the Cold War, aligned to neither side. And Austria and Finland both did extremely well as being a neutral zone, if you like.
Yeah.
Both were flourishing democracies, and that's really what I don't know. Maybe I'm too naive, but I'd say that the Russians were security minded, and that's what they wanted. And Ukraine could have had a peace in 2022 that might have even given them back the territories, never Crimea, but the Donbass territories. And they just needed to follow some rules on keeping Russian as a state language, a second official language, and so on. So I absolutely don't hew to this view of black and white, defeating the new Hitler of the East, authoritarian axis of authoritarianism. I don't believe that. No, I think the Russians are more human than that. That's my view.
Yes. Yeah. So when you say it's de-escalating, do you see an exit ramp for this?
No, I don't. No? I think it's de-escalating in the sense that the tensions of sending in troops. Although the New York Times had an article, it's going to be inevitable. I don't feel that we're on the way to there. I think that there's no appetite for it, and that was actually Ukraine's only solution. The only way Ukraine could have not lost is if NATO engaged wholesale, and if NATO doesn't engage wholesale, then it's going to be slow defeat, and at some point, Ukraine is going to have to sue for peace. And I think they could still they could still keep about 80% of their country. I don't understand. I just don't understand, because people in the East are Russian speakers, are pro-Russian, always have been, and they were historically part of Russia until 1922. Give them away. What's the point? Yeah, and then you still keep 80% of your country. You can join the EU and travel to the EU. You won't be able to join NATO, but so what? I just don't understand why they're so greedy. Is it because the eastern part has all the minerals, but the western part is fantastic farming land, and I don't know.
So the question, though, is if Ukraine, as you say, sues for peace, what does that mean realistically for the government? If they get some sort of a peace deal, does this mean ultimately then that we would end up with a puppet government in place controlled by the Kremlin? And many people say that Zelensky is right now a puppet of the United States. So this is a country that's been used as a doormat through history by different countries, going in and out of Russia to invade. So is suing for peace really a viable option, or is that just a facade in the end?
No, I don't believe in. I think the Russians. I think the Russian big fear is that they have a small population and a vast land, which will become increasingly important, and vast reserves of minerals resources, which they're very suspicious that the West wants to get its hands on. And whether it's true or not matters less than the fact that a lot of Russians believe it's true, and they believe it's true because the West destroyed Iraq and then Libya, and then has this reputation for using other countries' mineral resources and whatever. Like Iran, for instance. Not many people know that there's a coup in Iran against a nationalist leader in 1953 who wanted to keep the oil proceeds, but British Petroleum, or Anglo-Iranian as they were called then, didn't want to give it to them. They wanted to keep all the money for themselves. Anyway, so the Russians fear that they'd be stitched up, they'd be divided into 5 zones like Ukraine, each Ukraine-sized, and with a puppet running it and importing Western fashions, and that would, in the Western mind, for certain Westerners, that would continue the Western hegemony for another generation. 40 or 50 years maybe, living off that, and then threatening China from 2 ways. And that's why the Chinese are supporting Russia, because if they take out Russia, they take out us next. So the Russian fear is largely defensive. They don't want more territory. They're only 22. They're 2.5 times as big as Canada, which is the second largest country. And why? So why would they want a little itty bitty of Estonia or these people who don't want to have them anyway? It's defensive. I think you can negotiate a genuinely neutral regime in Kiev that could look to both sides and wasn't fanatically anti-Russian. The thing is that they're like the kid brothers of Russia culturally. And they've always had a language that's a kind of offshoot of Russian. And now they're walking tall and swaggering and boasting and insulting the Russians, who are like their big brothers, because they can, because they think they're the Americans behind it. They're saying, well, we are part of the West and you're not. You're barbarians, you're orcs, you're Easterners, you're half animals. We, on the other hand, are part of the West, and we've changed our Christmas day to the 25th of December and so on. And it's galling, I think, for the Russians, because they're the big brother in that historic relationship. And the Ukrainians are one of the poorest countries in Europe. So even without Russian interference, they badly managed their own country in the 30 years since the end of the Cold War, because they haven't made peace. I mean, they haven't controlled their oligarchs like Putin controlled his oligarchs. So it was much less of a political polity, than I know that people say Putin's a dictator, but anyway, I don't know. So the Ukraine is a badly managed country, and I think that their cultural pretensions, as it were, because what they're doing is making this dialect or small language on the western part of Ukraine, and they've been historically oppressed by everyone around them, by the Poles, by the Russians, by the Austrians. They're making that into the state language. I don't know. It's like turning. I'm going to try and say it's like turning Appalachian accent or something into the national language of America. It's like these kind of historic losers, if you like, and some of them were Nazis, and they're kind of dominating the whole country, and they're rewriting history books, and they're banning the Russian language from official positions, And I think that the Russians might demand that, well, reinstate, and nearly all Ukrainians outside the western part, which is rural, speak Russian or a dialect of Russian anyway in their everyday speech, and then they have to pretend that they actually speak Ukrainian, because you have these commissars walking around the streets, like you have these videos on YouTube, oh, speak Ukrainian, why are you not speaking Ukrainian? Sorry, I forgot, So it's a bilingual or a bi-national country. It's not black and white, Ukrainian or Russian. There's a kind of spectrum, and that's why it's so dangerous for the Americans and the British to support this Ukrainian nationalism, because it wasn't a single Ukrainian polity. As I said, it was Russians in the east and shading over into kind of Ukrainian identity in the west. And you tug at that, you force everyone to make a choice, and then the people on the eastern side are making the choice in the other direction. I think that if the Russians were respected and you could trade with them, and they could be happy that Ukraine could be a bridge into Europe. So I think it's unnecessary. I think it's horrible what has happened. It didn't have to be like this. Ukraine could have a much better solution. They've been much less arrogant towards the Russians, less swaggering. Oh, we're top dogs now. We're going to join the West. All that stuff, supremacism, and accepted. It's also an inferiority complex that the Brits have told them. The Brits are very good at doing this. If you're more like the French and the Brits, you can become like this. You don't be these Eastern people. And a lot of Ukrainians believe that. They have to purge their identity somehow and be as Western as possible. They should just accept that they are part of the Russian civilization, of which they're in very important part, rather than try and be someone they're not, And that's what I'm saying. It's a cultural thing, exactly what I've told you about the East versus West superiority thing. Because the Brits do that to everyone, everyone on the continent, like they did to the Germans before 1914. The Germans rose very quickly out of they were the last country to industrialize in Central Europe. I mean, after 100 years after the British, and they produced a lot of musicians and artists and writers and everything, and Nobel Prize winners. They had 80% of the Nobel Prize winners before the World War One, and they were just too good for the British. So the British see the British press talking about the jackboots, the goose stepping, the people, the Huns of the East, the barbarians, and all nonsense. And it just created this enormous hatred towards the Germans, who were quite willing to be part of a kind of European polity, but they were kind of being pushed and told that they were kind of inferior and that they couldn't join the cool kids, cool kids being Britain and France. So the British have been doing this for a long time. And now I just wrote this book on World War One. So I did a lot of research on the origins of World War One, and it was a cultural thing that the British had for 20 or 30 years against the Germans. So 1914 happened very much in the context of that. And
I understand your perspective.
yeah,
The thing is, with a situation like this, though, I have to wonder what's going to come after. And of course, we don't know how this will end, but this won't be something static. It won't. The progression of events, time will carry on.
That's
after
true.
the conflict ends. I see a real danger here, though, for the West. Now, I agree with you. I don't think the conflict ever had to happen. But now that we're into it and we're sort of, I see it almost as a halfway point right now. At the end of this, if Ukraine falls, the problem for the United States is they will lose credibility because they've stepped up and they've said, we're going to support you until the end, and we'll fund this thing, and we'll make sure that you win. And if Ukraine falls, I see huge cracks develop. Well, the cracks are already there in NATO. I could see this potentially blowing NATO apart. And when you listen to the rhetoric coming from Trump, even RFK Jr., I don't know that there's a lot of support even from the United States now, and certainly even from the public in the U.S. or in the West to keep NATO together. So in the long run, I could see this whole thing flying apart. And I mean, you've got that kind of fracturing in NATO. You have the BRICS nations as a direct competitor now to the U.S.-led Western economies. You see everything going on in the Middle East. So the U.S. and Western influence and use of the resources in the Middle East is being diminished. This is a huge problem for the U.S. If the U.S. dollar collapses or isn't even used as the world reserve currency anymore, this is a disaster. This could result in a depression that makes the dirty 30s look like prosperity. This is the longer term risk, I think, for the West. That's what Ukraine also represents, which is why I think there is a realism there for the United States at this point, and for even Western Europe. This could literally transform the future, and I think we're seeing it unfold. What do you see beyond the Ukraine conflict?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
or am I just being an alarmist?
No. Well, maybe. I mean, what happened after America pulled out of Vietnam? Nothing. Except we had a couple of good movies about America feeling sorry for itself. I mean, it was America is a more sympathetic country for me after Vietnam than during Vietnam. And then the Vietnamese grew to love the Americans, didn't they? And they picked themselves up, so they're now a really fast-growing economy, incredibly successful.
True.
So
enough,
so maybe won't be I see your point. You're right that it could transform things. I sort of feel, that maybe you've got a lot of Ukrainian, and I know there are a lot of Ukrainians in Canada. And so that's, and Chrystia Freeland, of course, is one of the most fervent supporters of Kiev. But
yes,
my feeling is Europe should never have got involved in Eastern Europe. I mean, because they're such a problem, they're such trouble. I mean, World War II started in that part of the world, World War I, and they drag in everyone else. And I think when the Poles and everyone got to join the EU and NATO, they were given a gigantic leverage, pivot, a gigantic hammer with which to resolve all their old resentments and hatreds, which we shouldn't have been part of. And because they cared a lot more about it than we did, they could do these sort of things without we were kind of noticing, and people in the West are so historically ignorant. So they'd be beavering away against their old Russian enemy. Lithuanians, of course, had an empire encompassing much of Ukraine, and now they're fantasizing about having that sort of thing back, Leave them to it. That's why Trump saying you're on your own, I think is quite good advice, because they're not going to be able to manipulate the Americans to fight their wars for them. The dumb giant, So and suddenly they realize they're on their own. They can't be the little kid in the schoolyard taunting the big guy just because they think they got a dad behind them. And they've got to live in that. They've got to live in that area and get real. I mean, we all have bosses we don't like, sort of thing. We all have to navigate the world where few of us can tell bosses to F off. You know, we all have to live go to a 9-to-5 job and be nice to that guy and be nice to that guy. Well, I mean, Estonia has to be nice to Russia because it's right next door to it. Instead, they're talking big words. Destroy Russia. Russia's got to be divided up. Estonia, this little mouse of 1 million people. Russia, you know, the world's second or third largest military power. They should, I don't know. So that's my thing.
That's political realism too. I mean, if you live right next door to a superpower,
exactly.
you know, you're a part of a tail, not able to wag the dog. So
exactly. No, I think
that's
I mean, it's not as if the Russians were threatening them. I mean, they were safely in the EU and in NATO. I've talked to Estonians; they're quite happy. It's their leaders who are really pushing. They didn't feel, oh, the Russians are oppressing us, you know, and we're bad. They're totally anchored in the West. Ditto the Poles. The Poles have done extremely well. 30 years of they're almost catching up with the Brits. But to me, they've got this virus of Russian threat or this ambition that they're never failing to make the mistake. So just as they finally got on the right side of history with prosperity and everything, you know, having been steamrolled by all sides during the centuries, they can't stop their historical. It's almost like a sort of psychopathic trait. You know, you can write a tragedy about it. Country, like a person on the cusp of success, does something that leads to his downfall again and again and again. And to me, the Poles taking on the Russians the way they're doing is like that. They didn't have to. They didn't have to. All this is unnecessary. Ukrainians have sacrificed a bit of their freedom, I guess. But, you know, as said, you know, it's all disastrous. I think that and don't forget, Russia wanted to join NATO back in 2000, but Clinton said yeah, or Clinton was still president then, but his advisors said no, partly because Americans didn't want as powerful a country as Russia, who could potentially threaten their complete dominance of the alliance. Although Russia was quite weak then, you know.
So what's your view on the Budapest memorandum?
Oh, well, that was the guarantee that the West had to
well, Russia and the West both agreed that if Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, that the borders of Ukraine would be guaranteed. And it was not just an assurance, it was a guarantee in writing. And then in 2014, as the story goes, Lavrov wouldn't even attend the meeting to discuss that, saying that the Ukrainian government wasn't legitimate and that memorandum had been signed by a previous government, so they wouldn't honor it.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I mean, I'd heard of the Budapest memorandum. I just couldn't remember the details. So my account is slightly partial, and it's not impossible that the Russians were bad then. On the other hand, you know, you did have the Minsk agreements, which was signed in 2014, which the West did nothing to push, and that would have basically given Ukraine to keep the whole of Donbass, even the completely Russian-speaking parts, if they provided some guarantees of local autonomy, just Quebec within Canada to Donbass. And you know, then there were the promises not to expand NATO and so on. I mean, I was in Estonia in the Baltics in the early 90s when the Russians pulled out of those countries just like that without firing a shot. Say, bye, we're off. I mean, what the French, they killed 300,000 of the Algerians before they pulled out of Algeria. So, I mean, the British were better, but even they killed tens of thousands of Kenyans in the 1950s, and then you had the Mau Mau rebellion. I think that was Kenya, wasn't it? And then they had a rebellion in Malaya, the Malayan uprising. So they were not the perfect decolonizers. The trouble is that the Russians had a lot of minorities in a lot of the countries that they left, and that's the root cause of it, as I see it. What do you know?
Yeah, you know, I see problems just that we're dealing with today because they weren't really dealt with properly in the past, whether it's the Iraq War, and we're suffering because the United States decided to take a unipolar approach to relations with countries in the Middle East, We don't have to listen to anybody. We're just going to do what we want, sort of thing. But then on the other side, I saw Saddam Hussein being kind of his own worst enemy because he kept taunting the U.S., thinking that Russia might come to his aid. But at that time, with the fall of the Soviet Union, they were in no position to provide any support for him. So he ended up where he ended up. I see the Russian Jews after the fall of the Soviet Union finally being allowed to leave the country, but Bush worried about too much immigration, so he capped the numbers that were allowed to emigrate from Russia, the Jewish Russians, to the United States. So you had this massive flood of Russian Jews heading to Israel, and that has also destabilized a lot of what's been going on in the Middle East, because then you had some of these hawks in Israel saying that we need to expand. And that's where this whole issue of expansionism, Israel expansionism and land grab really escalated, and that's inflamed things there. But Russia really hasn't really taken heat for that. It's the United States that's taken the blame for it in the court of public opinion, because Bush capped the immigration numbers, sort of funneling the immigration to Israel. So these are all, a lot of it is about public relations, as much as anything else too.
Yeah. But there's a Jackson-Vanik amendment, the 70s, when which insisted that tied the emigration of the Jews to human rights in the Soviet Union. So they wanted it. But yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought of that. I put the blame mainly on the Middle Eastern Jews, but the Russian Jews, and they're probably more hawkish than the ones who'd come from Poland or whatever. Maybe I can well imagine that.
And now you talk about this rules-based international order, but there's more than that too. And part of the problem, I think, for Israel right now, when it comes to public image, is they're very progressive. They, I think, have been exporting some of this progressivity, and you're seeing that in Eurovision with the transgenderism, the LGBTQS plus rights issues. A lot of that is coming from, well, it's all coming from the progressive left, and some of that is driven from progressivism within Israel itself. So the United States, Israel, they represent this progressive, neoliberal future or reality of today versus a more traditional nationalistic Orthodox Christian sort of vision from Russia, and a very conservative Islamic anti-gay, anti-LGBTQS plus vision for the future from these Middle Eastern Arab countries. So this is very complicated and very volatile, because you're mixing politics and religion, both. And it's dangerous, I would say.
Yeah, but the thing is, what it's interesting. What could have been done better? Incidentally, I mean, I talked to a lot of Americans, and they're all incredibly open-minded, but almost nobody talks about Jewish power. It's a huge taboo. I mean, if the whole Russiagate thing was about supposedly some Russians having influence on Trump, but I mean, the Russians don't own 7 Hollywood studios. The Russians don't own the major American media. Russians don't sit in Harvard. So, and I was just reading a book called a book about the discrimination against whites and in America, and how the borders opened after 65. I mean, just how white America was until 1965 and the Hart-Celia. But who was pushing for that? Well, I mean, it was a lot of Jewish intellectuals, That's a fact. Why can't you talk about that? There's this alliance between the civil rights. You could talk about the Black civil rights movement, but they were not organized enough. It was Jewish intellectuals, many of whom come from Central Europe in 1945. And so, but if you say that in America, you're politically dead, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think we are discussing that more today. I think some of that is steeped in anti-Semitic tropes. There's some truth to it, to be sure. These are these are corporations that are owned by shareholders, and you do have, if you go down the list and see who's sort of controlling them, you can make an argument like you've laid out. So there is an element of that. But I mean, here in Canada, when all the years I've worked for media, I only worked for one company that was Jewish owned. All the other media companies I worked for were not. So there's some truth, but it's not it's not a complete truth.
No. Sure.
So, I just see the danger. And you say what could have been done differently? I think that if the United States had just been a little more humble when they had that moment of unipolarity where they were the one world superpower, and they had fostered better relations with countries rather than maybe being a little too arrogant and overconfident at the time, not realizing that technology changes, and any country that's in a position of power like that, it's fleeting. Eventually, it diminishes, and you're no longer as powerful as you once were, and we're kind of there now, and we're paying the price for that. And I think Nixon kind of addressed that as well when he said, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that it was an opportunity for the United States to help make Russia work and make freedom work in Russia. But the United States really chose not to do that, I think, out of maybe paranoia and fear and arrogance, a combination of those things. And so what we got is exactly what Nixon predicted, which is a strong Russia emerging, renewed, and imperialistic in its own way, but not quite in the way that the United States is. They're now aligning with all these other countries and creating this. They've divided the world in half, and it's a competitor to what we have here in the West now.
I think the reason I was based in Eastern Europe in the early 1990s, so I met a lot of diplomats, carpetbaggers, writers, journalists, whatever, businessmen, entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And there was a feeling that Russia, a lot of people really thought Russia was evil, like Mordor. And I thought, this doesn't go along with what I see, because I see the Russians as very reluctant imperialists. That's just what I saw. I mean, it was the time of Gorbachev, and they just didn't care. They didn't care about their own country, let alone anyone else's. It's like, I don't care. That was their mentality. You went into a Russian embassy in London, and they were drunk, Getting into American embassy, and they were like, like Nazis, really well organized and disciplined, American Eagle. And I thought, Russia's the evil empire. They can't even clear away their vodka bottles from the night before, And so I kind of had always a benign, maybe too benign. It's like, it was that window in history when they were not imperialists, and I was very much colored by that. But yeah, they pulled out of their empire. But then what I saw was also a lot of extremely, East Europeans, like Poles, Balts, Ukrainians, Romanians, who really, really hated Russia. I mean, and of course, Russia, I know all about the gulags and the Stalinist depression, but they just couldn't let it go. And I actually see this, American foreign policy, I don't know, I talked about the Jewish lobby, but lobbies can have a lot of influence, on, and like the Ukrainian lobby in Canada. You might get lots of hate mail after this, I don't know, but, and especially like the Ukrainian exile lobby in America, because Americans used the Ukrainians to batter the Russians after World War II. The CIA funded Ukrainian nationalists, and then they came and settled in America. Of course, they were trying to displace Trump. That was partly a Ukrainian exile organization, or the DNC's Ukrainians were working hard on that. But so I think that they were not willing to compromise. I heard that they were treating very early on the Russians as people you just couldn't talk to. It was a very personal, very, very strongly held thing. And I know the young journalists I was working with are now senior journalists in London, and they just haven't changed their views one bit about Russia. Russia is evil. You can't talk to them. And I thought I spent a couple of years ago. I was really worried about. I thought a lot about fanatical Islam, and I think, well, that's not interesting anymore because I see fanatical white men doing this. This anti-Russian thing, and they're dominating. They sit in MI6, CIA, London Daily Telegraph, Washington Post, whatever, and Anne Applebaum. I mean, people like that. They're absolutely, totally set in their ways. I mean, nothing will change their minds. They won't change their minds on their deathbed, and they've always pushing for more escalation and war with Russia, and they're so dedicated. It's hard to stand against them if you just a young politician like Rishi Sunak who's just come in, doesn't know much about politics or history. So that's my one of my pet peeves. I've seen these people. I've worked in their shadow for all my life, basically, and I've seen how they've advanced their positions in the think tanks. And
as I say, I think Nixon sort of
but Nixon,
that. He saw it as an opportunity to move forward into the future, which is now our history, with better relations with Russia, and we missed that.
We missed it, and he was maybe toppled. I mean, he was advancing his pro-Russian, pro-China agenda in 1972, and immediately after that, Watergate happened, which some of my guests think it was a CIA takedown because they were convinced that you can't deal with Russia. So
I think that there's probably merit to that to a great degree.
So what happens if somebody wants to talk to Russia now? I mean, will they get there in Watergate?
I think that's what I think we've seen with Trump, because he wants peace. He does not want war with Russia. And it's my view that I don't think that he was, being directly compensated or paid or corrupted by Russia. Russia probably wanted him to win the election and maybe did some things like all governments do to engage in sort of online social media information propaganda or whatever. But largely, I think that we've seen something of a replay of Watergate and the way that that's been manipulated here domestically. And you're even like Roger Stone was worked on the Nixon campaign, and he's working on the Trump campaign. And they've gone after him in much the same way. So that's Roger Stone 2.0. So I think you've kind of nailed it right there. And we'll see what happens in this election coming up. Pelle, is there anything else you'd like to add
No, there's
today?
a lot more I'd like to talk about, but we can have it at a future show, I think. Look forward to it very much.
Yes,
it's quite late here in Europe, and
yes,
a new day beckons tomorrow with new guests and stuff.
Indeed. I really appreciate you taking the time. You've given us some great new perspectives on this Eurovision event with your recap, and I think that will help our viewers a great deal. It's helped me understand it a lot better.
Good. Okay. Well, happy to be on your show, and highly enjoyable to either you hear me out.
Just one last thing. Please tell people again how they can find your work.
Okay. Well, it's the Pelle Neroth Taylor show. You can see my name there on the screen. Type show after that. I'm on TNT Radio, which is an Australian-based channel, and I do a 2-hour show from I think it's 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Summertime, 4 to 6 p.m. European time, and I talk about geopolitics, cultural events, investigative stories, propaganda, and basically, if you listen to my show, you'll get I can guarantee you, I'll give you my best take on what's really happening in the world, not just what the corporate media tell you, because nobody tells me what to do. They're fantastic employers. And I just explore, there's fantastic investigative journalism in the West. It doesn't often reach the front pages of the corporate media, but fantastic books written on, let's say, Watergate. So I tried to bring out those narratives, because a lot of Europeans just take their cues from Washington Post. So like Watergate, there was a CIA takedown. Almost no one in Europe knows about that. But if they listen to my show, they'll be much better informed. So thanks for allowing me to give a little sell there. Okay, Rick.
Thank you very much, Pelle.
All right, lovely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good evening. Bye. Bye.
The information war is raging. Truth without integrity is worth nothing. Maverick News. Because those who have power and those who seek it must be held accountable.
The world is watching.
Join our family of truth seekers. Donate today and add your voice to the chorus of Maverick Knights. Donate at maverickdonations.com. Truth. Integrity. It's the Maverick way. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Did you guys see this meteor in Spain and Portugal? I mean, spectacular or what? It lit up the night sky for hundreds of kilometers. It was like a bright green fireball. Confirmed by the European Space Agency. They caught this thing on camera. Some social media posts about this tonight as well. We have video for you. Not exactly clear where the thing landed. May have completely burned up over the Atlantic Ocean. The space agency is saying it may have burned up about 38 miles or 60 kilometers over the Earth. I'm going to show you the video of this. This is, I mean, it is spectacular. Really, really cool. Very cool. Here's the first social media post that I was able to find. Look at this. Wow. Talk about a shooting star. Wicked. There's, quite a number of people captured this on video. Here's another angle from another location. Amazing. Look at that. Wow. First, the northern lights, because of the solar storms we've been having. The spectacular light show that provided. And now this. Here's another one. This one was shot in Spain as it made its way across the night sky. Incredible. The friction from the atmosphere against the meteor literally melting it away. Just amazing, amazing stuff. And again here, excuse me, a little scratchy throat here at the end of the night. Beautiful, isn't it? Wow. Oh, good. Holy smokes. Yeah, that's exactly the right reaction, too. It's like, what the? Whoa. Isn't that beautiful? Wow. So cool. And one more. This one shot by somebody driving down a highway. Here we go. Amazing. Here it is. Wow. And that, folks, is the real deal. No special effects. Just a giant space rock streaking through the atmosphere as it enters Earth space from outer space. And once again, It just makes you look up and realize that there are things around us that are way more powerful than we can even begin to comprehend. Love you guys. Catch you back here tomorrow night. Big thank you to Pelle and to Kevin for helping with the show tonight. Great guests, great contributors. Kevin on here quite a bit, and Pelle, I hope we can have him back real soon. Make sure you check out his work on TNT Radio. And I will be back here, hard at work again tomorrow night. Same time, same channel. Here on the Maverick News Network, where we have the antivirus programs for your mind. Catch you on the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.